Yo, what's up? Let's sample some video game music. Today's theme, racing games. I've done a few videos in the past where I would sample music from video games. I would just take these songs that were used as background music or menu music and flip them into something new. I just love how soundtracks are implemented in games. They help set the tone of the game and audibly convey its concepts. And one game genre I think has been pretty overlooked in its music department is definitely racing games. And these games have some of my favorite soundtracks ever. From the high-octane madness of the Burnout games to the sleek and classy menu music of driving sims, these soundtracks have so much range and emotion, and there are tons of songs that make for the perfect sample, which is what I'm going to do today. We're going to sample some racing game music and turn them into some bangers, so let's get started. Also, if you like any of the beats I made in this video, I'll have all of the FLPs on my Patreon. And no sponsor today, so please like the video. We can't talk about racing game soundtracks without mentioning Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo is one of the most important racing games in existence, built with the intention of being the most realistic driving simulator ever. These games are filled with so much detail and care in its gameplay, but the soundtracks of these games just blow the competition out of the water. It's mostly a mix of jazz and lounge music, but it's just so soulful and relaxing. The music makes me feel like I'm part of a high society, just browsing the catalog of my favorite supercars. This sample is coming from Gran Turismo 4, here's what it sounds like. I really like this sample, it's got a really cool rhythm to it, and it makes me want to make a fast-paced plug style beat. For my track, I took the sample, pitched it down 400 cents, and looped this 4-bar section of the intro. I added an EQ, a limiter to balance out the volume, a delay, and a reverb. I also looped this other section of the sample so I could use it later in the song. Next, I layered this piccolo preset that I found in Synth 1 and made this cool little melody with it. I like the retro feel of this piccolo preset too. I think it fits the sound design language of the sample nicely. Kinda has a whimsical vibe to it. I added an EQ, a delay, and a reverb with Lux Verb to it. Next I started layering the drums, and I started with this cool bossa nova style drum loop. And then I brought in the main drums. They're pretty much plug style drums with some tight hi-hats, some crispy claps, and some cool percussive hits. And then I'm adding this super hard kick that's coming in later in the beat. Next, let's add the 808. It's a nice thumpy bass and it hits hard. And finally, let's add some effects to fill out the song, like this cool scratch sound and these impacts. And here's the beat. We're going to sample one of my favorite games of all time, Need for Speed Carbon. Looking back on this game, Carbon has so much style to it. It's very sleek and serious, and I really like how moody and sophisticated this game is. And that moody and serious nature is also reflected in the game's soundtrack, having lots of songs with pretty minimal sound selection, but really strong musical motifs. For my track, here's the sample I picked. I like how grungy this guitar riff is in this track, and it's got some nice drum breaks in it as well. It makes me want to make a Kenny Mason style trap metal beat, something very rough and edgy. All I did was loop that really cool guitar section and added an EQ to cut the lows and a stereo shaper to widen it. I'm also going to use this cool drum section right here as a cool way to transition into the next 8 bars. Next, I added some acoustic hi-hats to help add to that rock theme of the sample, like this hi-hat loop and these ride cymbals. Next, I added some trap drums for some energy. Pretty standard stuff, but I added some reverb on the snare. I added the 808 next, and it's just going to follow the root notes of the guitar sample. I wanted something clean and heavy, so I'm using the goated Spins 808. The last few sounds I added were some crash cymbals, this effects scream, a little drum fill, and this EQ'd Memphis vocal sample. And once we arrange, here's the beat. This sample is coming from a game that's been forgotten by time. It's a PS2 era deep cut that I played as a kid, but not a lot of people remember. This sample is coming from the game Kinetica. Kinetica is an early 2000s futuristic racer, and the gimmick of this game is that your driver is the race car, and everyone has these cool exoskeleton suits. It's got a really unique cyberpunk aesthetic to it, and it has some pretty interesting designs. And the soundtrack fits the theme of this game perfectly. It's got a bunch of industrial drums and some synth-heavy production straight out of the early 2000s. Here's the sample. This sample sounds sick. It's got a ton of moving parts to it, and I love the badass synth nature of the song. I wanted to take the sample into a different direction and make a bouncy, Yeet-inspired beat, but with a funk twist to it. You know, I love my funk beats. I took the first 8 bars of the sample, looped it, and pitched it down 200 cents. I really wanted to use just the main synth sound of the sample, but my EQs just wasn't cutting it. So, I finally updated my FL Studio, and now I have that new function where I can extract stems from a sample. Absolute game changer. Remember to update your FL Studio. I then took the sample and added slow-mo for a halftime effect, an EQ to cut the muddy lows, and a stereo shaper and reverb for some space. I also kept the drums from the sample so I could use them as little drum fills for later. The sample has a bit of a siren feel to it, so I'm gonna make some synths in Vital to fit that anxious, high-energy vibe. The first synth is a funk-style cowbell, and it's playing a pretty simple melody. I also added an EQ, a reverb, and a few other effects, and I layered it nicely with this Memphis-style synth bass that I also made in Vital. Next, I added the string preset from Flex for a little high note spookiness. The last synth I added was a preset I made in 3x Oscillator. It's kind of like a bell sound that I made by shaping the volume envelope and adding some portamento. Here's a melody. Next, let's add the drums. They're pretty simple and pretty bouncy. And lastly, I wanted something a little bit different for the 808. I wanted something a little bit more futuristic, kind of matching the vibe of the game. So I'm using the Chase the Money 808. I love that ringiness it has. Lastly, I added a few EQs and a few reverbs to do this cool little intro thing with some automation clips. This makes the intro sound a little bit more big and imposing. But yeah, once we arrange, here's the final beat.